The lonely widow helped a stranded motorist, unaware he was a billionaire about to transform her life. The thought flickered through Margaret Wilson's mind as she peered through rain-streaked windows at the figure hunched beside a sleek black car on the roadside. Rain hammered against her roof, each drop a tiny echo of the emptiness that had filled her home since Robert's passing 3 years ago. She shouldn't stop. That's what everyone would say. 62-year-old women living alone don't pick up strangers on country roads, especially not during storms that turned dusk to darkness hours early. Her daughter would be furious if she knew, but something in the stranger's defeated posture struck a chord deep within Margaret. How many times had she felt that same helplessness since becoming a widow? How often had she wished someone, anyone, would simply notice? Her weathered hands tightened on the steering wheel of her ancient blue Volvo, the same car Robert had taught her to drive in nearly 40 years ago. "You're being foolish, Maggie," she whispered to herself, unconsciously using Robert's pet name for her. Still, she eased her foot off the accelerator. The rain intensified as she pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly in the gathering gloom. For a moment, she sat motionless, listening to the rhythmic sweep of wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. Then, with a deep breath, she reached for the umbrella wedged between the seats. Cold droplets stung her face as she emerged, the wind immediately inverting her umbrella. Margaret struggled to right it, her gray hair quickly plastering against her forehead. The man had spotted her now and straightened, raising a hand in grateful acknowledgement. "Car trouble?" she called over the storm, approaching cautiously. He nodded, stepping toward her. In the fading light, she could make out an expensive suit beneath his drenched overcoat. Tall, perhaps in his mid-40s, with a neatly trimmed beard threaded with silver. "Tire blew out. I'd change it myself, but..." He gestured to his right arm, which hung at an awkward angle. "Rotator cuff surgery last month. Still healing." Margaret nodded, understanding all too well how the body betrayed one with age. Her arthritis reminded her daily. "No cell service out here," he continued, "and I was beginning to think I might be spending the night in my car. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you stopped." Something in his voice, a genuine humility despite his obvious wealth, reminded her of Robert. Her late husband had built a modest construction business from nothing but had never lost his appreciation for kindness. "I'm Jack," he said, extending his left hand awkwardly. "Margaret," she replied, taking it briefly. "I live just 2 miles up the road. I can drive you there to call for assistance. Or perhaps help with the tire." Jack's eyebrows rose. "You know how to change a tire?" A small smile touched Margaret's lips for the first time that day. "My husband insisted I learn every aspect of vehicle maintenance. Said he wouldn't have me stranded anywhere without knowing how to help myself. He sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said softly, the words nearly lost in the rain. Together they gathered what they needed from his trunk. Despite the weather and her arthritis, Margaret felt a strange comfort in the familiar motions of loosening lug nuts and positioning the jack. Jack held the umbrella over her as best he could with his good arm, wincing each time she struggled with the wrench. "Please, you'll hurt yourself," he protested when she fought with a particularly stubborn bolt. "Nonsense," she replied, though her hands were already aching fiercely. "I may be old, but I'm not helpless." When the job was done, Margaret's clothes were soaked through, her knees caked with mud. But seeing the car restored to working order gave her a satisfaction she hadn't felt in months. Jack stared at her with undisguised admiration. "I don't know many people who would stop in this weather, let alone change a tire for a complete stranger." Margaret shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "It's what anyone would do." "No," he said with quiet certainty. "It isn't." The rain had slowed to a gentle patter. Margaret glanced at her watch, surprised to find nearly an hour had passed. "You must be freezing," Jack said. "Please, let me thank you properly. Is there somewhere nearby we could get coffee? Or dinner?" The suggestion startled her. She hadn't dined out since Robert's memorial service, when well-meaning friends had insisted on taking her to lunch. The thought of sitting across from a stranger, making conversation, sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. "I should get home," she demurred. "My cat will be wondering where I am." Jack nodded, but disappointment flashed across his face. "Of course. I understand." He reached for his wallet. "At least let me—" "No," Margaret interrupted firmly. "I don't want money." He studied her for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket instead and extracted a business card. "Then please take this. If you ever need anything at all, call me." The card was simple but elegant. Jackson Emerson, Emerson Innovations. Below was a phone number, nothing more. Margaret tucked it into her pocket without really looking at it. "Drive safely, Mr. Emerson." "Jack, please." His smile transformed his face, erasing years of strain. "And thank you again, Margaret. You've reminded me of something important today." As she drove home, Margaret found herself puzzling over his parting words. What could she possibly have reminded a man like him of? Her life was small, contained within the walls of the old farmhouse she'd shared with Robert for 4 decades. Their daughter, Emily, lived across the country with grandchildren Margaret rarely saw. Friends had drifted away after the funeral, uncomfortable with her grief. The house was dark when she arrived, save for the porch light she always left burning. Inside, her orange tabby, Rusty, wound between her ankles, complaining loudly about her tardiness. Yes, I know," she murmured, shedding her wet coat. "Dinner is late." After changing into dry clothes and feeding the cat, Margaret found herself standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the night. For the first time in months, the weight of solitude felt heavier than usual. The brief connection with another human being had reawakened something she'd carefully buried, a longing for conversation, for purpose beyond survival. She fished the business card from her damp jacket and examined it under the kitchen light. Emerson Innovations. The name sounded vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place it. On impulse, she opened her rarely used laptop and typed the company name into a search engine. The results made her sink slowly into a chair. Jackson Emerson wasn't just wealthy, he was a tech billionaire. His company had pioneered breakthrough medical technologies that had revolutionized treatment for several chronic diseases. His net worth was estimated at over $11 billion. Margaret closed the laptop, feeling suddenly foolish. She'd treated him like any stranded traveler, had even lectured him about proper tire maintenance as they'd worked. He must have found her quaint at best, pathetic at worst, an old woman desperate for human connection. "Well, Rusty," she said to the cat now curled in her lap, "at least we have a story to tell, don't we? The day I changed a billionaire's tire." She placed the card on her kitchen bulletin board, more as a memento than with any intention of using it. Then, as she did every night, she made a single cup of tea, took her arthritis medication, and settled into her recliner with a book she couldn't focus on. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of Robert, not ill and fading as he'd been at the end, but young and vibrant, smiling with approval as she deftly changed a tire in the rain. Morning arrived with unexpected brightness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline autumn day that seemed to mock Margaret's return to solitude. She followed her usual routine, feeding Rusty, making toast she barely tasted, checking the mail that rarely contained anything but bills and flyers. But as she walked back up the driveway, a sleek black car approached and slowed to a stop. Her heart quickened with recognition as Jack Emerson emerged, looking remarkably different in daylight. His suit was impeccably tailored, his presence commanding despite the sling supporting his injured arm. "Good morning," he called, his smile genuine. "I hope I'm not intruding." Margaret smoothed her hair self-consciously, acutely aware of her faded jeans and well-worn sweater. "Not at all. Is everything all right with the car?" "Perfect, thanks to you." He glanced at the modest farmhouse behind her, taking in the peeling paint and sagging porch steps. "I hope you don't mind my tracking you down. Small towns have talkative gas station attendants." She should have been alarmed at how easily he'd found her, but somehow his presence felt like the natural continuation of their interrupted conversation. "I realized after we parted that I never properly thanked you," he continued. "Would you allow me to buy you breakfast? There's a diner in town that apparently serves legendary blueberry pancakes." Margaret hesitated. The Margaret of yesterday would have politely declined. But the woman who had reached out to a stranger in the rain found herself oddly unwilling to retreat back into isolation. "I'd need to change," she said finally. His smile broadened. "I'll wait." 20 minutes later, they were seated in a booth at Clara's diner, where Margaret hadn't set foot since Robert's diagnosis 4 years earlier. The familiar smells and sounds washed over her, coffee brewing, bacon sizzling, the gentle clatter of plates and conversation. Clara herself, now well into her 70s, did a double take when she spotted Margaret. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she exclaimed, bustling over with coffee. "Margaret Wilson as I live and breathe. We've missed you around here." Margaret introduced Jack, watching with amusement as Clara immediately shifted into her most professional demeanor upon learning they had a visitor from the city in their midst. When they were alone again, Jack studied her over his coffee cup. "You're something of a local celebrity." Hardly, Margaret replied. In a town this size, everyone knows everyone. Robert, my husband, and I ran the hardware store for 30 years before he got sick. I'm sorry for your loss, Jack said quietly. 3 years next month. The words emerged more easily than expected. Cancer. We thought we had more time, but it spread quickly. Jack nodded, a shadow crossing his face. My wife died 7 years ago. Car accident. One moment she was heading to pick up our daughter from soccer practice, the next. He trailed off, twisting the gold wedding band he still wore. The revelation shifted something between them. No longer simply a good Samaritan and a grateful stranger, they were now members of the same unwanted fellowship, those who had loved and lost. Does it get easier? He asked suddenly. Margaret considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Not easier. Different. The pain changes shape. Some days it's a boulder on your chest. Other days it's just a stone in your pocket. Always there, but you can carry it. He nodded slowly. A stone in your pocket? Yes, that's exactly it. Their pancakes arrived, steam rising from blueberry-studded stacks. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the shared understanding between them more comforting than words. Tell me about your daughter, Margaret said eventually. Jack's face transformed, love evident in every line. Sophia. She's 17 now, brilliantly stubborn and determined to save the world. Currently applying to colleges, which is terrifying for both of us. After her mother died, I overprotected her. We're still finding our balance. That's natural, Margaret assured him. My Emily was 28 when Robert died, already married with children of her own, and I still wanted to shield her from the pain. How many grandchildren? 2. Robert Jr. is 12 and Lily just turned 9. Margaret smiled sadly. They live in Seattle. I see them at Christmas, sometimes in the summer if Emily can arrange it. That must be difficult. It is what it is. Emily has her own life to lead. I wouldn't ask her to arrange it around an old woman's loneliness. Jack studied her intently. You don't strike me as an old woman, Margaret. You strike me as someone with a great deal of life left to live. The words hung between them, an observation that felt strangely like a challenge. Before Margaret could respond, Jack's phone buzzed. He checked it with a grimace. I'm sorry, I need to take this. Business emergency. He stepped outside, leaving Margaret to stir her cooling coffee and wonder what she was doing here, sharing breakfast and confidences with a billionaire who lived in a world utterly foreign to her own. When Jack returned, his expression was apologetic. I'm afraid I need to cut our breakfast short. There's a situation at one of our research facilities that requires my attention. Of course, Margaret said, reaching for her purse. I understand. Please, I invited you. He placed several bills on the table, enough to cover their meal many times over. But I'd like to continue our conversation. Would you have dinner with me tonight? I'm staying at the Riverside Inn until tomorrow. Margaret blinked in surprise. The Riverside was the only upscale establishment within 50 miles, a restored Victorian mansion that catered to wealthy tourists seeking rustic charm. I don't think... Please, he said again, and something in his voice, a note of genuine longing for connection, resonated with her own hidden need. 7 o'clock? They'll know which room is mine. Against every cautious instinct, Margaret nodded. Throughout the day, she alternated between anticipation and anxiety. What could a man like Jack Emerson possibly want with her company? The cynical part of her, the part that had grown protective during long years of caregiving and subsequent solitude, whispered warnings about his motives. Yet, when she stood before her closet that evening, Margaret found herself reaching past her everyday clothes to the garment bag at the back, the royal blue dress she'd worn to Emily's wedding 8 years ago. It still fit, though more loosely now. Grief had whittled her already slender frame to something almost fragile. She applied makeup with trembling hands, skills long unused returning slowly. A touch of her seldom opened perfume, Robert's last Christmas gift to her. Simple pearl earrings, her wedding ring, never removed. The October evening had turned chilly. Margaret wrapped herself in her best wool coat and drove to the Riverside Inn, heart pounding with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Not quite fear, not quite excitement, but some volatile combination of both. Jack was waiting in the lobby, standing before the massive stone fireplace. He'd changed into dark slacks and a cream sweater that softened his professional demeanor. His eyes widened appreciatively when he saw her. "Margaret," he said, stepping forward, "you look beautiful." She flushed, feeling foolish. "It's just an old dress." "It's perfect." He offered his good arm. "Shall we? I've reserved a table in the dining room." The Riverside's restaurant was intimate and elegant, with white tablecloths and candles casting a golden glow over antique furnishings. Several diners glanced their way as they were seated, curiosity evident. Margaret could almost hear tomorrow's gossip. Margaret Wilson dining with a handsome stranger at the Riverside. "I hope you don't mind my arranging this," Jack said as they settled. "The diner was charming, but I wanted somewhere quieter to talk." "It's lovely," Margaret admitted, though she felt distinctly out of place among the other patrons in their designer clothes. "But surely you have more important matters to attend to than dining with a stranger who changed your tire." Jack studied her, head tilted slightly. "Actually, I've been thinking about our encounter all day. Do you know what struck me most about you, Margaret?" She shook her head. "Your hands," he said softly. "When you were wrestling with those lug nuts, I could see how painful it was for you. Your knuckles were swollen. Arthritis, I assume. Yet you refused to stop. You were determined to help, regardless of personal cost." Margaret looked down at her hands, weathered and knotted with years of work and illness. She'd considered wearing gloves tonight to hide them, but had decided against such vanity. "My company," Jack continued, "develops medical technologies. Our latest project is an advanced treatment for rheumatoid arthritis, a non-invasive procedure that could potentially eliminate pain and restore mobility." "That sounds remarkable," Margaret said cautiously. "It is. But lately, I've been so absorbed in quarterly reports and stock prices that I'd almost forgotten why we started this work in the first place." His gaze was intent. "Then you came along, struggling in the rain to help a complete stranger, your hands clearly causing you significant pain. You reminded me that behind every clinical trial and investor meeting are real people living with real pain." Margaret felt uncomfortable under his scrutiny. "I'm hardly special, Mr. Emerson." "Jack, please." "Jack," she corrected herself. "There are millions of people with arthritis far worse than mine, and we hope to help them all eventually. But right now, I'd like to help you." Margaret stiffened. "I don't need charity." "Not charity," he countered smoothly. "Opportunity. Our treatment is entering its final phase of clinical trials. We need participants who meet specific criteria." He hesitated. "Would you consider being evaluated for the program? All expenses paid, of course." The offer hung in the air between them. Margaret's first instinct was refusal. Pride had been her companion too long to easily set it aside. But beneath the pride was pain, constant and wearying, and the memory of all the things her stiffened hands could no longer do. "Why me?" she asked finally. "Surely there are thousands of qualified candidates." Jack set down his wineglass. "Because you helped me without expectation of reward. Because you're living with pain yet still reaching out to others. Because I believe in paying forward kindness when I can." He smiled slightly. "And because I find your company refreshing. In my world, Margaret, genuine people are rare treasures." Before she could respond, their appetizers arrived, delicate crab cakes garnished with microgreens. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they ate. Jack described growing up in Boston, the son of a plumber who'd worked 2 jobs to put him through MIT. Margaret shared stories of raising Emily in this small town, the challenges and joys of running the hardware store with Robert. "What happened to the store?" Jack asked as their entrees were served. Margaret sighed. "Sold it to pay for Robert's treatments. Insurance covered some, but the experimental therapies were out of pocket. Worth every penny for the extra months they gave us, but there was nothing left afterward. And now? I get by," she said simply. "Social Security, a small pension. The house is paid for, thankfully. Robert insisted on life insurance that covered the mortgage." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "He sounds like a man who took care of details." "He tried to think of everything," Margaret agreed, throat tightening. "But he couldn't prepare me for the silence. That's the hardest part. Coming home to an empty house after 42 years of someone always being there." Jack's expression softened with understanding. "Sophia was my salvation after Caroline died. Having someone who needed me kept me functioning. But she'll be gone next year, off to college, and He trailed off, then admitted quietly, "I'm terrified of the silence waiting for me." The vulnerability in his confession touched Margaret deeply. Here was a man who could buy anything, yet faced the same fundamental human loneliness that she struggled with daily. "You learn to fill it," she said gently. "With small routines, with projects. Some days the silence feels almost peaceful. Other days?" She shrugged. "Other days I talk to Rusty until he gives me concerned looks." Jack laughed, the sound warming the space between them. "My housekeeper probably thinks I've lost my mind. I have full conversations with Caroline's portrait in my study, Robert's fishing hat," Margaret confessed. I still ask it questions sometimes. They shared a smile of perfect understanding, two people who had found a momentary bridge across different worlds through shared loss. As the evening progressed, Margaret found herself relaxing, enjoying Jack's company more than she'd enjoyed anything in years. He was intelligent without being condescending, successful without arrogance. When he spoke of his daughter, love illuminated his face. When he described his company's work, passion animated his voice. By dessert, a decadent chocolate torte they agreed to share, Margaret had almost forgotten the disparity in their circumstances. Almost, but not quite. Reality reasserted itself when Jack's phone buzzed again with messages he apologetically had to address. The burden of connectivity. He sighed, tucking the device away. Sometimes I envy simpler times. They weren't necessarily simpler, Margaret replied, just differently complicated. Jack smiled appreciatively. Wisdom earned through experience, something no technology can replicate. He hesitated, then added, I meant what I said about the clinical trial, Margaret. No strings attached. Just an opportunity that might help you, while also advancing research that could help countless others. Margaret traced the rim of her coffee cup, considering. The arthritis had worsened steadily over the past year. Some mornings she could barely button her own clothing. The thought of relief, even temporary, was powerfully tempting. Where would this trial take place? Boston. Our primary research facility is there. He anticipated her next question. The evaluation takes 1 day. If you qualify, the treatment itself is outpatient, 2 sessions a week apart. We'd cover all travel expenses, accommodations, everything. That's very generous. It's very selfish, actually, Jack countered with a rueful smile. I'd like to see you again, and this gives me a legitimate excuse to do so. The unexpected admission startled her. Mr. Emerson, Jack, I'm an old woman from a small town with arthritic hands and a mortgage-free farmhouse. She gestured vaguely, surely you can see how improbable this all seems. What I see, he said quietly, is a woman of extraordinary character who stopped to help a stranger in the rain. What I see is someone who understands loss as I do, who doesn't pretend grief has easy answers. What I see, Margaret, is a connection I wasn't looking for, but am very glad to have found. Heat crept into her cheeks. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider the trial. Say you'll allow me to give something back to you, even if it's just the possibility of less pain. Margaret looked into his eyes, searching for ulterior motives, but finding only sincerity. Slowly she nodded. I'll consider it. Jack's smile was like sunrise. That's all I ask. When he walked her to her car later, the night air was crisp with approaching winter. Stars spangled the sky above the inn's carefully maintained gardens, more visible here than in the city lights Jack was accustomed to. Thank you for a lovely evening, Margaret said, fumbling slightly with her keys. Jack reached out, his hand closing over hers. The warmth of his touch was shocking in the cool night air. The pleasure was entirely mine. He hesitated, then added, I fly back to Boston tomorrow afternoon. Would you have breakfast with me again before I go? 1 more stack of those legendary pancakes? The invitation shouldn't have made her heart beat faster. She was 62, long past the age of giddy responses to male attention. Yet something in his expression, hopeful, almost boyish despite the success and wealth, touched her deeply. I'd like that, she said simply. His smile was worth the butterflies in her stomach. 8 o'clock? I'll pick you up. Margaret drove home in a daze, her mind replaying snippets of conversation, the brush of his hand against hers. What was happening to her? One random encounter on a rainy evening, and suddenly her carefully constructed routine was disrupted by feelings she'd thought long buried. At home, Rusty greeted her with his usual mixture of affection and accusation for leaving him alone. Margaret scooped him up, burying her face in his orange fur. Oh, Rusty, she whispered. I think I might be losing my mind. The cat purred indifferently, concerned only that she was home now and presumably ready to provide a late-night snack. In the bathroom, preparing for bed, Margaret studied her reflection critically. The woman who gazed back looked more alive than she had in years. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. The blue dress had been a good choice, bringing out the silver in her hair rather than competing with it. But the hands that removed her makeup were still gnarled, the neck that had once been smooth now creased with time. Whatever Jack Emerson saw when he looked at her, it couldn't be what he saw in women his own age. Women with unwrinkled skin and straight fingers and futures stretching endlessly before them. Be sensible, Margaret, she told her reflection firmly. He's being kind, that's all. Don't mistake kindness for anything else. Yet as she slipped between cold sheets, Margaret found herself wondering what it might be like to visit Boston. She'd never seen the city, though Robert had promised they'd go someday. Someday had never come. Perhaps now it could. Morning arrived with thin October sunlight and an unexpected flurry of activity. Margaret changed outfits 3 times before settling on a soft lavender sweater that Emily had sent last Christmas, still with its tags attached. She spent extra time with her hair, unused to caring so much about her appearance. When Jack's car pulled into her driveway precisely at 8, Margaret was waiting on the porch, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. He emerged with a smile that warmed her more thoroughly than her thick cardigan. "Good morning," he called, approaching with an easy confidence. Today he wore jeans and a casual button-down shirt, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him yet. The sling was gone, though he still moved his right arm gingerly. "Your arm seems better," she observed as they walked to his car. "Much better." "I was probably being overly cautious with the sling." He opened the passenger door for her, a courtesy she hadn't experienced in years. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," she lied, not admitting that she'd lain awake for hours thinking about their dinner conversation. "And you?" "Better than I have in ages," Jack said, settling behind the wheel. "There's something about the country air, I think. Or perhaps the company." The diner was bustling with the Saturday morning crowd when they arrived. Clara seated them at the same booth as yesterday, her knowing smile making Margaret blush like a schoolgirl. "You've caused quite a stir in town," Jack remarked after they'd ordered. "The waitress at the next table has been staring since we walked in." Margaret sighed. In a place this size, 2 breakfasts with a handsome stranger constitutes a major scandal. By noon, half the town will be speculating about our relationship. "Handsome, am I?" Jack teased, eyes crinkling. Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You know very well you are. And what would you like me to tell the curious townsfolk about our relationship?" The question hung between them, ostensibly light but weighted with possibility. Margaret busied herself with her coffee cup. "That we're friends," she said finally. "New friends with an unusual meeting." Jack nodded, accepting her cautious definition. "Friends," he repeated. "I like that. I don't have many, you know. Real ones, anyway." "I find that hard to believe." "It's the truth. Wealth changes how people see you, how they interact with you. Everyone wants something: funding for their startup, connections to influential people, donations to their causes." A shadow crossed his face. "After Caroline died, I realized how few people in my life just wanted my company for its own sake. That sounds terribly lonely," Margaret said softly. "It can be. That's why I value authenticity when I find it." His eyes met hers. Like a widow who stops to help a stranger in the rain, expecting nothing in return. Their pancakes arrived, momentarily halting the conversation. Margaret was grateful for the interruption, needing time to process the intensity of his gaze, the implication of his words. As they ate, Jack told her about Sophia's college applications, his hopes and fears for her future. Margaret shared stories of her grandchildren, showing him pictures Emily had sent last week. "They have your eyes," Jack observed, studying the image of Lily on Margaret's phone. "Robert's eyes, actually. The Wilson blue, he called it." She smiled sadly. "I see him in them every time we video chat." "How often do you visit?" "Not often enough. Flights are expensive and Emily's schedule is hectic with the children's activities." Margaret tried to keep the longing from her voice. "We manage once or twice a year." Jack studied her thoughtfully. "Have you thought any more about the clinical trial? It would give you a reason to travel. Boston isn't Seattle, but it's a change of scenery at least." "I have thought about it," Margaret admitted. "It's tempting, but," she sighed, "but I'm not used to accepting help, Jack. Not on this scale. After Robert died, I had to learn to be fiercely independent. Pride becomes a habit. I understand pride, believe me. My father was the same way." Jack leaned forward. "But consider this. If you participate in the trial, you're actually helping us. Your experience, your feedback, it's valuable data that moves the research forward." Put that way, it did seem less like charity. And the thought of even temporary relief from the constant ache in her joints was powerfully alluring. "When would this evaluation take place?" she asked. Jack's face brightened. "We could arrange it whenever is convenient for you. Next week? The week after?" His eagerness made her smile. "You're very persistent. Only about things that matter," he replied. "And helping you matters to me?" The simple declaration hung between them, sincere and unadorned. Margaret found herself without a ready response. "All right," she said finally. "I'll do it." But I insist on traveling coach, not whatever extravagant arrangement you're imagining. Jack's smile was luminous. Deal. Though I reserve the right to upgrade your hotel accommodations. The places near our facility are, he wrinkled his nose, institutional. As they finished breakfast, Jack became increasingly distracted, checking his watch and phone. I'm sorry, he said eventually. My flight leaves in 3 hours and I have several calls scheduled before takeoff. Margaret nodded, ignoring the disappointment that settled in her chest. Of course. You've been very generous with your time already. Outside, the October morning had warmed slightly, golden sunlight filtering through trees now half bare of leaves. Jack walked her to her car, his expression thoughtful. I've enjoyed our time together immensely, Margaret, he said as they reached her Volvo. More than I can adequately express. As have I, she replied honestly. He hesitated, then reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. I'll have my assistant contact you about arrangements for the evaluation. Would next Thursday work for you? Margaret nodded, acutely aware of the warmth of his touch, the tenderness with which he cradled her arthritic fingers. Excellent. He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Until then, Margaret Wilson. She watched him walk away, struck by the strange sense that her life had somehow shifted on its axis in the space of 2 days. Whatever came next, whether the clinical trial helped her or not, something had awakened in her that had been dormant for too long. The possibility of connection, the reminder that she was still alive, still capable of feeling something beyond the dull ache of loss. As she drove home, Margaret found herself smiling at the brilliant autumn day, noticing beauty she had been blind to for years, the fiery red of maple leaves, the deep blue of the October sky, the rhythm of life continuing around her. For the first time since Robert's death, Margaret felt the stirring of something she had thought permanently extinguished, hope. True to his word, Jack's assistant called Monday morning. The woman's crisp efficiency was tempered with genuine warmth as she explained the arrangements. A first-class ticket to Boston, despite Margaret's protestations, a suite at the Four Seasons Hotel, a car service for the duration of her stay. Mr. Emerson was very specific about making sure you're comfortable, the assistant explained when Margaret tried again to decline such lavish accommodations. It's too much, Margaret insisted. Ms. Wilson, the woman said gently, I've worked for Mr. Emerson for 9 years. When he takes a personal interest in something, there's no point arguing. And he's taken a very personal interest in making sure you have a positive experience in Boston. The words sent a rush of warmth through Margaret's chest, followed immediately by caution. She was being foolish, reading too much into simple kindness. A man like Jack Emerson, with his wealth and position, couldn't possibly be interested in a small-town widow 20 years his senior. This was gratitude, nothing more. Yet as the week progressed and Margaret prepared for her journey, she found herself taking unprecedented care with her packing. She ordered new walking shoes better suited to city exploration. She visited the local salon for a trim, something she usually did herself to save money. She even splurged on a new nightgown, though she immediately felt ridiculous for doing so. Emily called Wednesday evening, their weekly check-in that had become a lifeline for Margaret over the past 3 years. You're going where? Her daughter exclaimed when Margaret mentioned her upcoming trip. Margaret explained about the clinical trial, carefully minimizing Jack's role in the arrangement. Something held her back from sharing the full story of their connection. That's wonderful, Mom, Emily said, though her tone carried a hint of concern. But are you sure it's legitimate? You've never mentioned this company before. It's completely legitimate, Margaret assured her. Emerson Innovations is a major medical technology firm. You can look them up. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. Oh, Emily said a moment later, her voice shifting to surprise. Oh, Mom, this is a multi-billion-dollar company. How did you get into their clinical trial? Margaret hesitated. I met someone who works there. They thought I might be a good candidate. More typing. Mom, this company was founded by Jackson Emerson. He's one of the 50 richest people in America. Emily's voice sharpened. Who exactly did you meet? Caught, Margaret sighed. Jack Emerson. His car had a flat tire during that big storm last week. I stopped to help him. You stopped to help. Emily's voice rose. Mom, are you telling me you changed a billionaire's tire in the rain? And now he's flying you to Boston for a clinical trial? This sounds like the plot of a Hallmark movie. Despite herself, Margaret laughed. It does, doesn't it? But it's all above board, Emily. He's just being kind. Men worth $11 billion don't arrange clinical trials for random strangers out of kindness, Mom, Emily said skeptically. What aren't you telling me? Nothing. We had breakfast. Twice. And dinner once. He's a friend. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Emily, it's not what you're thinking. He's younger than me, successful beyond imagination, and has a teenage daughter. I'm just someone who did him a favor. Uh-huh, Emily said, unconvinced. And I suppose just someone who did him a favor explains why you sound more animated than you have in 3 years. Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. Was it that obvious? I'm excited about the possibility of the treatment working. She deflected. You know how bad my hands have gotten. Emily's tone softened. I do know, Mom. And I'm glad you're getting help. Just be careful, okay? Rich men can be complicated. I'm a 62-year-old widow, not a naive ingenue, Margaret reminded her. I'm going for the medical treatment, that's all. But as she hung up, Margaret had to acknowledge that her accelerated heart rate whenever she thought of seeing Jack again had nothing to do with arthritis treatment. Thursday dawned clear and cool. Margaret's flight wasn't until afternoon, but she was awake with the sun, too wired to sleep. By the time the car service arrived to take her to the airport, she had changed outfits 3 times and nearly convinced herself to cancel the entire trip. This is ridiculous, she muttered as she locked the front door, Rusty safely in the care of her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins. You're acting like a teenager, not a grown woman with grandchildren. Yet the flutter in her stomach persisted throughout the drive to the airport, through the unfamiliar luxury of priority check-in and the first-class lounge. It was still there as the plane took off, carrying her toward a city she'd never seen, and a man who had unexpectedly awakened feelings she'd thought long dead. Boston in late October was a riot of autumn color. As the car service drove Margaret from the airport to her hotel, she pressed her face to the window like a child, drinking in the historic architecture, the golden light slanting across the public garden, the energy of a city so different from her quiet rural town. The Four Seasons was more opulent than any place she'd ever stayed. Margaret felt distinctly out of place as a white-gloved doorman ushered her into a marble lobby filled with well-dressed people speaking in hushed, important tones. But the staff treated her with the same deference they showed everyone else, escorting her to a corner suite with views of Boston Common that stole her breath. On the elegant writing desk sat an arrangement of autumn flowers, deep burgundy dahlias, golden sunflowers, russet chrysanthemums, and a handwritten note, Margaret, welcome to Boston. I hope your journey was comfortable. I've taken the liberty of arranging dinner in your suite this evening at 7, if you're not too tired from traveling. The evaluation at the clinic is scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to call me directly. With warmest regards, Jack. His private number was written beneath his name. Margaret sank onto the edge of the luxurious bed, note in hand. Dinner. Tonight. In her suite. The intimacy of the arrangement should have alarmed her, yet she felt only a tremulous anticipation. She spent the afternoon alternating between unpacking, exploring her extravagant accommodations, and gazing out at the city spread before her. At 5, she began the process of preparing for Jack's arrival, taking extra care with her appearance. At precisely 7 o'clock, a gentle knock sounded at her door. Margaret took a deep breath, smoothed her charcoal gray dress, and opened it. Jack stood in the hallway, more casually dressed than she'd seen him before, in a navy sweater and gray slacks. He carried a bottle of wine in one hand and a small gift bag in the other. His smile when he saw her made her momentarily forget every rational caution. Margaret, he said warmly, you look lovely. Thank you, she managed, stepping back to let him enter. And thank you for the flowers. They're beautiful. I thought autumn colors would make you feel at home. He handed her the gift bag, a small welcome to Boston. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound guidebook to the city, clearly chosen with care rather than ordered by an assistant. Margaret was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. I thought perhaps if you're feeling up to it after the evaluation tomorrow, I could show you some of the places marked in there, Jack said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Or if you'd prefer to explore on your own, the car service is at your disposal. I'd love a tour, Margaret said honestly, though I don't want to impose on your workday. Jack's smile returned. I've cleared my schedule for tomorrow afternoon. Running the company has some privileges. As they spoke, room service arrived with a cart laden with covered dishes, a gourmet meal complete with fine china, crystal, and silver. Jack tipped the server generously, then turned to Margaret with a boyish eagerness. "I hope you don't mind dining in. The restaurants downstairs are excellent, but rather public. I thought you might prefer privacy for your first night in the city." The consideration behind his words touched her. "This is perfect," she assured him. They settled at the elegant table by the window, the city lights beginning to twinkle below as dusk descended. Jack opened the wine, a rich red that complemented the meal, filet mignon for him, herb-crusted salmon for her. He'd remembered her mention of preferring fish during their breakfast conversations. As they ate, Jack asked about her flight, her impressions of Boston, whether her suite was comfortable. His attentiveness was unlike anything Margaret had experienced since Robert's early courtship days, when every detail about her had seemed fascinating to him. "You've gone to extraordinary lengths," Margaret said as they finished their entrees. "I feel rather overwhelmed by it all." Jack studied her over his wine glass. "Have I made you uncomfortable?" "That wasn't my intention. Not uncomfortable exactly. Just," she searched for the right word, confused perhaps, "about why you're doing all this. Is it so hard to believe someone would want to help you, Margaret?" "Help me, no. But this," she gestured to the elegant room, the gourmet meal, the flowers, "goes far beyond help." Jack set down his glass, his expression turning serious. "When my wife died, I buried myself in work. I built Immerse Innovations from a promising startup into a global company. I made billions, and none of it filled the emptiness Caroline left behind." He leaned forward slightly. "Then one rainy night, a stranger stopped to help me, not because of who I was or what I could do for her, but simply because I needed help. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world?" Margaret shook her head, caught by the intensity in his eyes. "In those moments as we changed the tire together, I felt more human connection than I had in years of board meetings and charity galas. And when we talked at breakfast the next morning, when you spoke about grief as something to be carried rather than overcome," he paused. "Margaret, you reminded me that I'm still alive. That connection is still possible. That wealth and success mean nothing without human contact." His words hung in the air between them, honest and unguarded. Margaret found herself without a ready response, too moved to speak. "So yes," Jack continued softly, "I've gone to extraordinary lengths, as you put it, because meeting you has been extraordinary for me. The clinical trial is legitimate. I truly believe it could help you. But I won't pretend my motives are purely altruistic. I wanted to see you again. I wanted to spend time with someone who sees me as a person, not a portfolio." Margaret's throat tightened with emotion. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Jack smiled gently. "Just enjoy the meal, the hotel, the treatment tomorrow. No expectations beyond that." But as they shared dessert, a decadent chocolate soufflé, and Jack told stories of his early days building his company, Margaret found herself wondering if it was already too late for no expectations. Something was growing between them, a connection neither had anticipated but both clearly felt. When Jack finally rose to leave, the evening had slipped away in conversation that flowed as naturally as if they'd known each other for years rather than days. "I'll send a car for you at 9:30 tomorrow," he said at the door. "The evaluation usually takes about 3 hours. If you qualify for the treatment, and I believe you will, they'll schedule the first session for early next week." "Thank you," Margaret said, suddenly shy. "For everything." Jack hesitated, then reached for her hand, raising it gently to his lips in an old-fashioned gesture that sent warmth cascading through her. "Until tomorrow, Margaret." After he'd gone, Margaret stood motionless in the center of her suite, her hand still tingling from the brush of his lips. What was happening to her? She was too old, too sensible for such romantic notions, yet her heart raced like a schoolgirl's after a first kiss. As she prepared for bed in the luxurious bathroom, Margaret studied her reflection critically. The woman who gazed back was recognizably herself, yet somehow different, eyes brighter, posture straighter, an unmistakable glow that hadn't been there in years. Is this what hope looks like? She wondered. Or something more dangerous? The evaluation at Immerse Innovations' research facility the next morning was thorough, but not unpleasant. Doctors conducted blood tests, range of motion assessments, ultrasounds of her joints, and detailed interviews about her symptoms. Throughout the process, Margaret was treated with a respect and attentiveness that made clear Jack had personally emphasized her case. "Your arthritis is precisely the type our treatment targets," the lead physician explained when the evaluation was complete. "You're an excellent candidate for the trial." Relief washed through Margaret. "So what happens next?" We'd like to schedule your first treatment for Monday morning. It's non-invasive, essentially a targeted ultrasound therapy combined with our proprietary biologic agents. The session takes about 2 hours, and you may experience some fatigue afterward, but most patients report noticeable improvement within 48 hours. Margaret nodded, trying to temper her hope with realism. And the second treatment? The following Monday. We found the optimal interval is 7 to 10 days between sessions. That meant nearly 2 weeks in Boston. Margaret hesitated, thinking of the expense, the imposition on Jack's generosity. Is something wrong, Mrs. Wilson? The doctor asked. I wasn't expecting to stay quite so long, she admitted. The physician smiled reassuringly. Mr. Emerson has already arranged for your accommodations through the end of the month. He was quite insistent that you have time to recover comfortably between treatments. Of course he had. Margaret wasn't sure whether to be touched or alarmed by Jack's thoroughness, his apparent determination to care for her in every detail. As promised, Jack was waiting when she emerged from the facility shortly after 1 o'clock. He stood beside a vintage Morgan convertible, its British racing green paint gleaming in the autumn sunlight. How did it go? He asked eagerly as she approached. I qualified, Margaret confirmed. First treatment is scheduled for Monday. Jack's face lit with genuine pleasure. That's wonderful news. How are you feeling? Tired from all the tests? A little, she admitted, but mostly I'm just trying to process what they told me about the treatment. If it works as they described, it will, Jack said with quiet confidence. I've seen the results in other patients. The success rate is over 80%. Margaret nodded toward the sports car. Yours? An indulgence, Jack admitted with a boyish grin. I thought we might take advantage of the beautiful day for our tour of Boston. Unless you're too tired? The convertible was impractical, ostentatious, and utterly charming, like something from another era when life was less complicated. Margaret found herself smiling despite her reservations. I'm not too tired, she decided. But are you sure you want to spend your afternoon playing tour guide? Surely you have more important things to do. Jack opened the passenger door with a gallant gesture. Nothing more important than showing a new friend my favorite city. The afternoon that followed was like something from a dream. Jack drove them along the Charles River, the autumn leaves a blaze of color against the blue sky. He showed her Harvard's historic campus, told stories of his student days at MIT, guided her through the winding streets of Beacon Hill with its gas lamps and brick townhouses. They stopped for coffee in the North End, Boston's Italian district, where Jack was greeted by name at a tiny cafe tucked away on a side street. The owner, an elderly man with a thick accent, insisted they try his homemade cannoli. Jack brings all his special guests here, the man told Margaret with a knowing wink that made her blush. Salvatore exaggerates, Jack said as they settled at a corner table. I haven't brought anyone here in years. The casual admission hung between them, charged with significance neither acknowledged directly. As afternoon faded toward evening, Jack drove them to a scenic overlook with panoramic views of the Boston skyline. The setting sun bathed the city in golden light, transforming glass skyscrapers into pillars of fire against the darkening sky. It's beautiful, Margaret murmured, drawing her sweater closer against the autumn chill. Jack watched her rather than the view, his expression thoughtful. There's something I'd like to ask you, Margaret. Her pulse quickened at the seriousness in his tone. Yes? The company is hosting its annual charity gala tomorrow night. It's a rather formal affair. Black tie, champagne, wealthy donors writing large checks for medical research. He hesitated. Would you consider attending with me? The invitation caught her off guard. Jack, I don't have anything to wear to something like that. That's easily remedied, he said quickly. The hotel has personal shoppers who could bring selections to your suite. Or if you'd prefer to choose something yourself, the concierge can arrange a private appointment at any store you'd like. Margaret shook her head, overwhelmed. It's too much. I'd be completely out of place among your colleagues and donors. Jack's expression softened. You'd be with me. He reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers where it rested on the car's center console. I understand if you're uncomfortable with the idea, but I'd be honored to have you there. The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his voice, Margaret found her resistance melting despite her better judgment. Why? She asked simply. Jack's thumb traced a gentle pattern over her knuckles. Because in a room full of people who see me as a wallet or a connection or a stepping stone, you're the only one who would see just me. The vulnerability in the admission touched her deeply. How lonely his success must be, how isolating his wealth. For all the differences in their circumstances, perhaps they shared more than was immediately apparent, both navigating lives that had taken unexpected turns, both seeking genuine connection in a world that made it increasingly rare. "All right," she said softly. "I'll come." Jack's smile was like sunrise. "Thank you. I'll have everything arranged." He drove her back to the hotel as dusk settled over the city, the convertible's heater keeping the autumn chill at bay. At the entrance, a doorman hurried to open Margaret's door while Jack came around to offer his hand. "I have meetings this evening that I can't reschedule," he said apologetically. "But I've taken the liberty of arranging dinner to be delivered to your suite at 7, if that's acceptable." "More than acceptable," Margaret assured him. "You've already given me a wonderful day." Jack's eyes held hers for a long moment. "It was my pleasure, truly." He hesitated, then leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her cheek. "Until tomorrow, Margaret." The whisper of his lips against her skin stayed with her as she made her way to her suite, as tangible as the memory of Robert's last kiss before the hospice sedation took him beyond reach. The comparison should have troubled her, yet somehow it felt right. Not a replacement of love, but an affirmation that her heart still lived. The following morning brought a flurry of activity. True to Jack's word, a personal shopper arrived at 10 with an array of evening gowns for Margaret to consider. The woman, effortlessly chic in her black sheath dress and pearl earrings, moved through the suite with professional efficiency, hanging garments and arranging accessories. "Mr. Emerson provided your size but asked that I bring a range of styles for you to choose from," she explained. "He specifically mentioned you might prefer something with sleeves and a modest neckline." The thoughtfulness of the directive touched Margaret deeply. Jack had noticed her preference for more conservative clothing and had respected it without comment. What followed was a surprisingly enjoyable few hours as Margaret tried on more beautiful dresses than she'd worn in her entire life. The personal shopper, Elise, was kindly honest about what flattered Margaret's slender frame and silver hair, steering her away from harsh colors and toward more flattering silhouettes. "This one," Elise said decisively when Margaret emerged in a midnight blue gown with three-quarter sleeves and a subtle shimmer to the fabric. "The color is extraordinary with your complexion, and the cut is perfection." Margaret studied her reflection, hardly recognizing the elegant woman who gazed back. The dress was undeniably beautiful, enhancing her good features while minimizing her concerns. The modest neckline was balanced by a graceful drape that suggested rather than revealed. "It's lovely," she admitted. "But surely too expensive." Elise waved away the concern. "Mr. Emerson was very clear that price was not a consideration." Despite her unease about accepting such generosity, Margaret couldn't deny the rightness of the dress. She nodded her agreement, and Elise immediately began selecting accessories: simple silver heels with a low, comfortable height, a delicate evening bag, a cashmere wrap in a slightly lighter blue. "Will there be anything else, Miss Wilson?" Elise asked when everything had been arranged. Margaret hesitated. "Perhaps earrings?" "Nothing extravagant," she added quickly. "Just something simple that would complement the dress." Elise smiled approvingly. "I have several options in the car. I'll bring them right up." By the time the personal shopper departed, Margaret had a complete ensemble laid out on the bed, more elegant than anything she'd worn since her own wedding nearly 43 years earlier. The total cost remained tactfully undisclosed, but Margaret suspected it exceeded what she typically spent on clothing in several years. The rest of the day passed in quiet anticipation. Margaret treated herself to a long bath in the suite's luxurious tub, using the hotel's expensive bath products and allowing herself the rare indulgence of complete relaxation. Afterward, she called Emily for their usual weekend check-in, carefully editing her descriptions of Boston to minimize Jack's role in her experiences. "You sound different, Mom," Emily observed near the end of their conversation. "Happier." "Do I?" Margaret asked, genuinely surprised. "Yes. It's nice to hear." Emily paused. "This clinical trial seems to be good for you, regardless of the actual treatment." Margaret thought of Jack's smile, the gentle pressure of his hand over hers, the kiss that had brushed her cheek like a whisper of possibility. "Yes," she agreed softly. "I think it is." At 6, a stylist arrived, another of Jack's arrangements, to help with hair and makeup. By 7:30, Margaret hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. Her silver hair was elegantly styled in a soft updo that framed her face. The makeup was subtle but transformative, highlighting her blue eyes and giving her complexion a gentle glow. Jack arrived precisely at 8, resplendent in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and trim waist. He stopped short when Margaret opened the door, his expression one of undisguised admiration. "Margaret," he said softly, "you look absolutely beautiful." She flushed at the sincerity in his voice. "The dress is lovely." "It's not the dress," Jack said, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's you." He offered his arm, and Margaret placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, acutely aware of his warmth through the fine fabric of his jacket. Together they made their way through the hotel lobby, where heads turned to follow their progress, Jack Emerson, instantly recognizable to many, escorting a silver-haired woman who carried herself with unexpected grace. A limousine waited at the curb, its driver hurrying to open the door as they approached. Inside, Jack poured champagne from a small built-in bar, handing Margaret a flute of pale gold liquid. "To new beginnings," he said, touching his glass gently to hers. The bubbles tickled Margaret's nose as she sipped, the taste bringing memories of her last anniversary with Robert. They'd splurged on champagne, knowing it might be their last celebration together. Robert had raised his glass with hands already weakened by illness and offered the same toast, "To new beginnings." At the time, it had seemed a cruel irony. Now it felt like permission. The gala was held at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, its grand entrance illuminated by thousands of tiny lights. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the doors, flanked by photographers capturing the arrivals of Boston's elite. Margaret's grip on Jack's arm tightened involuntarily. "We can use the side entrance if you prefer," he murmured, sensing her anxiety. Margaret took a steadying breath. "No, I'm fine. Just stay close." His smile was warm and reassuring. "I'm not going anywhere." As they stepped from the limousine, flashbulbs erupted. Jack guided her smoothly forward, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. He nodded acknowledgments to the photographers but didn't pause, moving them efficiently toward the entrance. Inside, the museum's grand hall had been transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting prismatic light over tables draped in midnight blue linens. Ice sculptures in the shape of the company logo adorned a massive buffet. A string quartet played classical pieces from a small stage. "Jack!" A woman in a striking red gown approached, air kissing his cheek before turning curious eyes to Margaret. "You didn't tell me you were bringing a guest tonight." "Sophia," Jack said warmly, "I'd like you to meet Margaret Wilson." "Margaret, this is my daughter." Margaret blinked in surprise. The poised young woman before her bore little resemblance to the teenager Jack had described. In her elegant gown and sophisticated makeup, Sophia Emerson looked at least 21. "It's lovely to meet you, Ms. Wilson," Sophia said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Dad's told me all about you." "Call me Margaret, please," Margaret replied, extending her hand. "And I've heard wonderful things about you as well." Sophia's handshake was brief but firm. "Have you? How interesting." She turned to her father. "The Blackwells were asking for you. Something about doubling their donation this year." Jack nodded. "I'll find them shortly." His tone was gentle but firm. "Why don't you join us for a drink first? I'd like you two to get to know each other." Though Sophia smiled her agreement, Margaret didn't miss the calculating assessment in the girl's gaze as Jack guided them toward the bar. This was not the brilliantly stubborn daughter eager to save the world that Jack had described with such affection. This was a young woman viewing Margaret as a potential threat. Over champagne, Sophia asked pointed questions about Margaret's background, her connection to Jack, her impressions of Boston. Though her manner remained outwardly polite, an undercurrent of protective suspicion ran beneath each inquiry. Jack intervened when the questioning grew too intense. "Sophia is starting at Harvard next fall," he said, deftly changing the subject. "Pre-med with an emphasis on neuroscience, following in your father's footsteps," Margaret observed. "That's wonderful." "Dad's the business side," Sophia corrected. "I'm interested in the actual science, the breakthroughs that change lives, like the arthritis treatment," Margaret said. "It's quite remarkable technology." Sophia's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're familiar with our biometric resonance therapy?" "Margaret is participating in the clinical trial," Jack explained. "She's an ideal candidate for the treatment." Understanding dawned in Sophia's eyes. "I see. So that's why you're in Boston?" "Yes," Margaret said firmly, wanting to establish boundaries around her relationship with Jack, especially for his daughter's sake. "Your father very kindly arranged for me to be evaluated after we met by chance in my hometown." Some of the tension left Sophia's shoulders. That makes sense. Dad's always bringing people into trials when he sees someone who might benefit. She smiled more genuinely. He has a soft spot for helping people directly, not just through the company's work. It's one of his most admirable qualities. Margaret agreed. Jack, watching the exchange with evident relief, squeezed Margaret's hand gently. I should make the rounds. Speak to some of the major donors. Would you mind terribly, Margaret? Not at all, she assured him. I'll be fine. As Jack moved away to greet an elderly couple across the room, Sophia turned to Margaret with newfound warmth. I'm sorry if I seemed unwelcoming at first. Dad doesn't usually bring dates to these functions. Oh, I'm not, Margaret began, but Sophia continued. After Mom died, there were women who were very persistent, interested in his money, his connections. She sipped her champagne, eyes following her father's progress through the crowd. He was vulnerable. I had to become protective. The simple admission humanized Sophia instantly. Not a spoiled socialite, but a girl who had lost her mother and was fiercely guarding her remaining parent. I understand, Margaret said gently. My daughter was the same after my husband died. Not that there were men pursuing me, she added with a small laugh, but she worried about me being taken advantage of in other ways. Sophia studied her with new interest. You're a widow? Margaret nodded. 3 years now. Cancer. I'm sorry. The words were genuine. Mom's been gone 7 years. Car accident. Sophia's gaze drifted back to Jack. He seems different with you. More like his old self. Before Margaret could respond, they were joined by a distinguished older man who greeted Sophia warmly before being introduced to Margaret. Dr. Wilson is our chief of research, Sophia explained. The genius behind most of our breakthrough technologies. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions as Margaret was brought into conversation after conversation. To her surprise, she found herself enjoying the interactions. These brilliant scientists and physicians spoke with genuine passion about their work, and they listened with real interest when she described her arthritis symptoms. You're in good hands with our trial, Doctor, Wilson assured her. The results have been remarkable, particularly for patients with your specific presentation. Throughout the evening, Jack would return periodically to her side, his hand finding the small of her back, his smile warming when their eyes met. He introduced her to donors and board members as my friend Margaret, his tone investing the simple word with deeper meaning. When the formal dinner began, Margaret found herself seated between Jack and Dr. Wilson with Sophia directly across. The conversation flowed easily, touching on medicine, technology, books they had read, places they had traveled. Margaret contributed when she could, surprised to find her perspectives valued despite her lack of scientific background. You ask excellent questions, Dr. Wilson commented after a particularly insightful inquiry about the arthritis treatment's mechanism. You would have made a fine researcher. Just a curious mind. Margaret demurred. My husband always said I should have gone to college, but we married young, and then the hardware store and Emily came along. It's never too late, Sophia said unexpectedly. Harvard has amazing extension programs for adult learners. You could take classes online. The suggestion, offered without condescension, touched Margaret deeply. Perhaps I'll look into that when I return home. Or you could stay in Boston a bit longer, Jack said quietly, for her ears alone. The treatments will keep you here through the end of the month anyway. The possibility hung between them, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Margaret didn't trust herself to respond. After dinner came dancing. A small orchestra had replaced the string quartet, playing standards that reminded Margaret of her parents' record collection. Jack stood and offered his hand. Would you care to dance? Margaret hesitated. It's been a very long time, like riding a bicycle, he assured her with a smile. The dance floor was already crowded with couples when Jack led her to its edge. He took her right hand in his left, his other hand settling respectfully at her waist. The familiar position brought memories flooding back, high school dances, her wedding reception, anniversary celebrations with Robert. Relax, Jack murmured as they began to move. Just follow my lead. And somehow, despite the years since she'd last danced, Margaret's body remembered. They moved together with surprising grace, Jack adjusting his steps to accommodate her less confident ones. As the music continued, Margaret found herself relaxing into the rhythm, into the gentle pressure of Jack's hand at her waist. You're a natural, he said, guiding her through a simple turn. Margaret laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Hardly. But thank you for the fiction. Jack's eyes crinkled with his smile. Have I told you how beautiful you look tonight? Several times? she replied, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her at his words. "And have I told you how glad I am that you're here? How every conversation is more interesting with you in it?" Margaret's pulse quickened. Jack ... "Too much?" he asked softly. "I don't know what this is," she admitted. "What we're doing, where it's going." Jack's expression grew serious. "Does it need definition? Can't we simply enjoy discovering the answer together?" Before she could respond, the music changed to a slower tune. Jack drew her slightly closer, still maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of his cologne, the warmth radiating from his body. "I haven't felt this way in a very long time," he said quietly, his gaze holding hers. This sense of possibility, of wanting to know someone more deeply, of looking forward rather than back. Margaret's heart pounded against her ribs. "I'm 20 years older than you, Jack. I live in a small town halfway across the country. You run a global company. Your daughter is about to start college. These aren't minor complications." "No," he agreed. "They're not. But are they insurmountable?" The question hung between them as they continued to move slowly across the dance floor, bodies swaying in gentle rhythm. Margaret had no answer that wouldn't expose the fragile hope taking root in her heart, hope she still feared to nurture too carefully. When the dance ended, Jack led her from the floor, his hand warm against the small of her back. They rejoined Sophia and Dr. Wilson at their table, where conversation resumed, though Margaret found it increasingly difficult to focus. Jack's question echoed in her mind, demanding consideration she wasn't ready to give. The evening wound to a close near midnight. Jack made a brief speech thanking donors and researchers, his natural charisma evident as he spoke about the company's mission to improve lives through medical innovation. Standing at the edge of the crowd, Margaret watched him with a mixture of admiration and trepidation. This was his world: wealth, influence, important work that affected thousands of lives. Her own existence seemed small and provincial by comparison, yet when he found her afterward, his eyes sought hers with a warmth that made such concerns momentarily insignificant. "Ready to go?" he asked softly. In the limousine returning to the hotel, a comfortable silence settled between them. Margaret watched the city lights glide past, too full of contradictory emotions to speak. Jack seemed content to give her space, his hand resting lightly on the seat between them, not quite touching hers but close enough that she could feel its warmth. At the hotel entrance, he stepped from the car and offered his hand to help her out. The doorman rushed forward to open the main doors, nodding respectfully as they passed. "I'll walk you up," Jack said as they reached the elevator. In the hushed confines of the elevator car, Margaret became acutely aware of Jack's presence beside her. His height, the breadth of his shoulders beneath the tailored tuxedo, the subtle scent of his cologne. When he glanced down at her, his expression held a tenderness that made her breath catch. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said as they reached her floor. "It meant a great deal to me. I enjoyed it more than I expected," Margaret admitted as they walked the carpeted hallway to her suite. "Your colleagues are fascinating people. They liked you," Jack said. "Particularly Dr. Wilson, which is no small feat. He rarely warms to anyone outside the scientific community." They reached her door. Margaret slipped the key card from her evening bag, suddenly uncertain. The moment felt weighted with possibility, with unspoken questions. "Would you like to come in?" she heard herself ask. "For coffee, perhaps?" Jack's smile was gentle. "I'd like that very much." Inside the suite, Margaret moved to the small kitchenette to prepare coffee, while Jack loosened his bow tie and removed his jacket, draping it carefully over a chair. The domestic normalcy of the moment struck her with unexpected force. How natural it felt to share this space with him, how easily they had fallen into a comfortable rhythm together. "Sophia seems remarkable," Margaret said as she brought 2 cups to the sitting area where Jack had settled on the small sofa. "She is," he agreed, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Though I worry about her sometimes. She took Caroline's death hard, had to grow up too quickly. Tonight was the most relaxed I've seen her with someone new in years." "She loves you very much," Margaret observed. "It's clear in how protective she is." Jack nodded. "We've been each other's whole world since Caroline died. It's been difficult, watching her prepare to leave for college. Necessary but difficult. Empty nest syndrome," Margaret said with a small smile. "I remember it well. When Emily left for college, I cried for 3 days straight. Robert didn't know what to do with me. What helped? Time. Finding new routines. Remembering that her independence was exactly what we'd raised her for." Margaret sipped her coffee, memories washing over her. Robert suggested we take a vacation, our first without Emily. We went to the coast for a week. It was healing. Jack studied her over the rim of his cup. You must miss him very much. Every day, Margaret said honestly. But differently now. The raw pain has mellowed into something I can live with. Do you think... Jack hesitated, then continued carefully. Do you think there's room in your heart for new attachments? New feelings? The question hung between them, direct yet gentle. Margaret set down her cup, heart racing. I didn't think so, she admitted quietly. Until recently. Jack's expression softened. He reached across the small space between them, taking her hand in his. Margaret, I don't want to rush you. I know this has all happened very quickly, but I want you to know that my interest in you is genuine. Not gratitude, not charity, not loneliness, though perhaps all those elements exist. What I feel when I'm with you is connection, real connection. Margaret looked down at their joined hands, his strong and tanned, hers pale and marked by time and illness. Jack, I'm 62 years old. You're in your prime. What possible future could there be in this connection? I don't know, he said honestly, but I'd like to find out. If you're willing. The vulnerability in his expression touched her deeply. This powerful, wealthy man was offering something precious. Not promises he couldn't keep, not romantic platitudes, but simply the chance to explore possibility together. I'm afraid, she whispered. Of what? Of feeling again. Of caring. Of being hurt. She met his gaze directly. Of hurting you. Jack squeezed her hand gently. Life offers no guarantees, Margaret. We both know that too well. But isn't possibility worth the risk? As he spoke, he leaned forward slightly, his intention clear yet unhurried, giving her every opportunity to withdraw. Margaret held perfectly still, heart pounding as he moved closer. The touch of his lips on hers was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. For a moment, Margaret remained frozen, overwhelmed by the sensation of being kissed after so many years alone. Then, almost involuntarily, she responded, her free hand rising to rest against his chest. The kiss deepened, remained tender but grew more certain. Jack's hand came up to cradle her cheek, his touch reverent. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. I should go, Jack said softly, though he made no move to release her hand. Margaret nodded, unable to form coherent thoughts with her heart racing and her lips still tingling from his kiss. He stood reluctantly. Your first treatment is Monday at 10. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? There's a small restaurant on the harbor I think you'd enjoy. Yes, Margaret said, finding her voice at last. I'd like that. At the door, Jack turned back, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty that made him look suddenly younger. Sleep well, Margaret. After he'd gone, Margaret sat motionless on the sofa, fingers touching her lips in wonder. What was happening to her? To them? The rational part of her mind listed all the reasons this connection was impractical, impossible even. The difference in their ages, their circumstances, their worlds. Yet her heart, so long dormant, now beat with renewed purpose. Not replacing what she had lost. Nothing could ever replace Robert, but finding room for something new. Something unexpected, but no less precious for its surprising arrival. As she prepared for bed, Margaret caught sight of her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The elegant updo was coming loose, tendrils of silver hair framing her face. Her lips were slightly swollen from Jack's kiss, her cheeks flushed with color. She looked alive. Truly alive, not merely existing. For the first time since Robert's death, Margaret went to sleep with a sense of anticipation rather than resignation. Whatever happened next, whether this fragile connection with Jack blossomed or faded, she had been reminded of an essential truth. Her story wasn't over yet. The following week passed in a blur of medical appointments and quiet moments of connection. Margaret's first treatment on Monday was followed by dinner with Jack at the harbor restaurant he'd mentioned, a small, family-owned place where the owner greeted him by name and fussed over Margaret like a long-lost relative. Tuesday brought unexpected fatigue from the treatment, and Jack arranged for lunch to be delivered to her suite. He joined her briefly between meetings, his concern evident in every solicitous question about her comfort and well-being. By Wednesday, Margaret felt markedly improved, not just from the lingering treatment effects, but in her hands themselves. For the first time in years, she woke without the grinding ache in her knuckles. She could button her cardigan without fumbling, could hold her coffee cup without wincing. It's working, she told Jack that evening as they walked along the Charles River, her hand tucked comfortably in his. "I can feel the difference already." His smile was radiant. "I'm so glad, Margaret. You deserve relief." Thursday, Jack had to fly to New York for business, but he called her twice, once in the morning to check on her, again in the evening for a longer conversation that meandered comfortably through topics serious and trivial. Margaret found herself laughing more than she had in years, curled on her hotel suite sofa with the phone pressed to her ear, listening to Jack describe a disastrous meeting with investors. "I wish you'd been there," he said. "You would have seen right through their pompous posturing." "I doubt I'd have been much help in a corporate boardroom," Margaret demurred. "You underestimate yourself," Jack countered. "Your insight into people is remarkable." The simple praise warmed her more thoroughly than the luxury hotel's perfect heating system. Friday brought Jack back to Boston and a carefully planned surprise, tickets to the Boston Symphony Orchestra, followed by a late supper at an elegant restaurant overlooking the city. As the orchestra played Rachmaninoff, Jack's hand found hers in the darkened concert hall, his thumb tracing gentle patterns across her knuckles. The weekend unfurled with unhurried pleasure. Jack showed her parts of Boston tourists rarely saw: hidden gardens tucked between brownstones, a small bookstore specializing in rare first editions, a family-owned bakery that made pastries to rival any in Paris. They talked for hours about everything and nothing: books they had loved, films that had moved them, places they hoped to visit someday. Jack spoke of his childhood in a working-class Boston neighborhood, his father's determination that he attend college, his mother's unwavering belief in his potential. Margaret shared stories of growing up on a small farm, of meeting Robert at 17 and knowing immediately that he was the one, of building a life centered on family and community. With each conversation, each shared confidence, the connection between them deepened. Jack's kiss goodnight at her door grew less hesitant, more certain, though he never pressed for more than she was ready to give. By the time Margaret's second treatment arrived on Monday, something profound had shifted between them. No longer simply two lonely people finding momentary comfort in each other's company, they had begun to build something with stronger foundations: mutual respect, genuine affection, shared values despite their different circumstances. The second treatment went smoothly, with even more immediate results than the first. By Tuesday afternoon, Margaret could make a fist without pain for the first time in nearly a decade. The doctors were delighted with her progress, scheduling a follow-up evaluation for Thursday morning. "The results are remarkable, Dr. Wilson told her during the evaluation. "Better than we typically see even in optimal candidates. Your inflammation markers have decreased by nearly 70%. Does that mean the treatment is permanent?" Margaret asked hopefully. "Based on our long-term studies, most patients maintain significant improvement for at least 2 years. After that, a single booster treatment usually restores full benefit." He smiled warmly. "You'll need to continue some of your current medications, but at reduced dosages. And the pain should remain substantially diminished, if not eliminated entirely." The news was better than Margaret had dared hope. As she left the research facility, she found Jack waiting as usual, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Good news?" he asked, holding the car door for her. "Very good," Margaret confirmed as he slid behind the wheel. "Doctor, Wilson says the results are remarkable." Jack reached over to squeeze her hand gently. "I'm so happy for you, Margaret." He drove them to a small park overlooking the harbor, parking in a secluded spot with views of the water. Sailboats glided across the bay, their white sails bright against the deep blue of the October sky. "I have a confession to make," Jack said after they'd sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. "I've been struggling with what to say to you today." Margaret turned to him, concerned by the seriousness in his tone. "About what?" Jack took a deep breath. "You're scheduled to fly home on Saturday. Your treatments are complete, the evaluation is finished. There's no medical reason for you to stay in Boston any longer." "Yes," Margaret said carefully. "That's true." He turned in his seat to face her more directly. "I don't want you to go." The simple declaration hung between them, weighted with implication. "Jack," Margaret began uncertainly, "we've had a wonderful time together, but—" "I know all the rational arguments," he interrupted gently. "The age difference, the geographic distance, are different circumstances. I've made them all to myself repeatedly." His gaze held hers intently. "But none of them change how I feel when I'm with you, or how empty the thought of returning to life without you makes me feel." Margaret's heart raced. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying I care for you, Margaret." Deeply. More than I thought possible after Caroline died. Jack took her hands in his expression open and vulnerable. I'm saying I'd like to explore what's happening between us without the artificial timeline of your departure hanging over us. How would that work, practically speaking? Margaret asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the emotions surging through her. Stay longer, Jack suggested. Another week, another month, whatever feels right to you. Get to know Boston better. Get to know me better, outside the context of your treatment. He squeezed her hands gently. No pressure, no expectations beyond seeing where this leads naturally. The offer was tempting beyond words. The thought of returning to her empty farmhouse, to the silence and solitude that had been her constant companions for 3 years, felt suddenly unbearable compared to the warmth and connection she'd found with Jack. Yet caution still held her back. I have responsibilities at home. Rusty, the house, all manageable, Jack said quickly. We could fly back this weekend together. Make arrangements for your cat, secure the house, pack whatever you'd need for a longer stay. Then return to Boston. He smiled hopefully. I have a meeting in Chicago on Monday I can't reschedule, but we could be back in your hometown by Friday evening, spend the weekend there, and return Sunday. The plan was so practical, so carefully considered, that Margaret found her resistance weakening. You've thought this through. I've thought of little else for days, Jack admitted. I'm not ready to say goodbye to you, Margaret. The naked honesty in his voice touched her deeply. This wasn't a casual invitation, a wealthy man's whim. This was something more significant, a deliberate choice to pursue possibility despite complications. I'm afraid, she confessed softly. Of what? Of disrupting the life I've built. Of opening myself to pain again. She hesitated, then continued honestly, of falling in love with you and then losing you too. Jack's expression softened. He raised one hand to cup her cheek gently. I can't promise we won't face challenges. I can't guarantee where this will lead. But I can promise you this. I will be honest with you always. I will respect your independence and your history. And I will never treat what's growing between us as anything less than the precious gift it is. As he spoke, he leaned forward slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she chose. Instead, Margaret closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that conveyed what words could not, her own growing feelings, her willingness to risk pain for the chance at joy. When they parted, Jack rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her face. Is that a yes? He murmured. Margaret smiled, a sense of rightness settling over her despite all logical objections. Yes, she said simply. Let's see where this leads. Jack's answering smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. He kissed her again, more deeply this time, his arms drawing her closer across the center console of the car. The remainder of the week passed in a flurry of plans and preparations. Jack arranged for their flights to Margaret's hometown, made hotel reservations, adjusted his schedule to maximize their time together. Margaret called Mrs. Jenkins to extend her cat-sitting arrangement, contacted the local handyman to check on her house while she was away. Emily called Thursday evening, concerned about the change in plans. Another month in Boston? Mom, what's really going on? Is something wrong with your treatment? No, quite the opposite, Margaret assured her. The treatment has been remarkably effective. I have almost no pain for the first time in years. Then why stay longer? Emily pressed. Margaret hesitated, uncertain how to explain what was happening with Jack without sounding foolish or naive. I've made a friend here, she said carefully. Someone I'd like to spend more time with. There was a moment of silence, then understanding dawned in Emily's voice. Oh, Mom, is this a romantic friend? The direct question deserved an honest answer. Yes, Margaret admitted. It's unexpected and complicated, but yes. The billionaire? Emily asked incredulously. Jack Emerson? Yes. Another stunned silence. Mom, I don't even know what to say. Are you sure about this? You hardly know him. I'm not sure of anything, Margaret said truthfully. Except that when I'm with him, I feel more alive than I have since your father died. And I'm not ready to walk away from that feeling yet. Emily's tone softened. Oh, Mom, I want you to be happy, you know that. I just worry. Men like that, I know all the reasons to be cautious, Margaret interrupted gently. Believe me, I've gone through them repeatedly. But Jack is different from what you might expect. Genuine. Thoughtful. He makes me laugh. He listens, really listens when I speak. Dad would want you to be happy, Emily said after a moment. You know that, right? Tears pricked at Margaret's eyes. "I do know that. Then take your time. Explore this. Whatever it is. Just promise me you'll be careful with your heart. I promise," Margaret said, though she suspected it might already be too late for such caution. Friday evening found them on a plane bound for Margaret's small hometown, Jack's private jet making the journey a comfort Margaret could never have imagined when she'd flown commercial just weeks earlier. As the lights of Boston receded below them, Jack reached across to take her hand. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. Margaret shook her head. "Not second thoughts. Just adjusting to how quickly life can change. For the better, I hope?" She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Definitely for the better." They arrived late that night, checking into the Riverside Inn, the same place where Jack had stayed when his car broke down, though now they had separate rooms. In the morning, they drove to Margaret's farmhouse in a rental car, the familiar landscape both comforting and somehow different through Jack's presence beside her. Rusty greeted Margaret with loud complaints about her extended absence, then promptly turned his feline charm on Jack, rubbing against his legs and purring dramatically. "Traitor," Margaret told the cat fondly as Jack scratched behind his ears. "He has excellent taste," Jack replied with a grin. Together they walked through the house, Margaret suddenly seeing it through Jack's eyes, the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the thousand small signs of financial constraints carefully managed. Yet Jack's expression showed nothing but appreciation as he examined Robert's handcrafted bookshelves, the quilts Margaret had made over the years, the garden visible through the kitchen window. "It's a real home," he said warmly. "You can feel the love that went into creating it." The simple observation, free from condescension, eased a tension Margaret hadn't realized she was carrying. She'd been half afraid he would find her life small and provincial compared to his. They spent the day packing what she would need for an extended stay in Boston, making arrangements for Rusty to join them. The hotel allows pets with advance notice, Jack had assured her, and securing the house for a longer absence. Margaret called longtime neighbors to keep an eye on the property, arranged for snow removal if winter arrived early, forwarded her mail to Jack's Boston address. Saturday evening, Jack took her to dinner at Clara's diner, seemingly oblivious to the stares and whispers their entrance generated. Clara herself bustled over, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Margaret Wilson," she exclaimed, "we were beginning to think you'd abandoned us for the big city." "Just temporarily," Margaret assured her. "I'll be staying in Boston a bit longer, that's all." Clara's gaze shifted to Jack, recognition dawning. "Well, I can certainly see why," she said meaningfully, bringing a flush to Margaret's cheeks. Over blueberry pancakes, served for dinner at Jack's special request, they talked about the weeks ahead. Jack had commitments that would take him to Chicago, San Francisco, and briefly to London. Margaret was welcome to accompany him if she wished, or to stay in Boston and explore the city at her own pace. "My home is yours for as long as you care to stay," he said, his expression earnest. "Whether that's a month or longer." The open-ended nature of the invitation hung between them, full of possibility. Margaret found herself imagining a future where these conversations, these shared meals, this growing connection became the foundation of something lasting. Sunday morning, they visited Robert's grave before their departure. Jack waited respectfully at a distance while Margaret placed fresh flowers beside the headstone. "I think you would approve," she told the granite marker quietly. "Not because of his success or his wealth, but because of his kindness, his integrity. He makes me laugh, Robert. He makes me feel alive again." The autumn breeze rustled through nearby trees, sending a shower of golden leaves spiraling to the ground. Margaret chose to take it as a blessing. That afternoon, they boarded Jack's jet for the return flight to Boston. Rusty secured in a luxury pet carrier that had appeared mysteriously that morning. "Just something I had delivered," Jack had said casually when she'd questioned its origin. As the plane climbed above the clouds, Margaret gazed out the window at the patchwork landscape below, the small town where she had built a life with Robert, raised a daughter, known both profound joy and devastating loss. She wasn't abandoning that life or those memories, she realized. She was simply allowing them to become part of a larger story, one still being written. Jack's hand found hers across the narrow aisle. "Okay?" he asked softly. Margaret turned from the window to meet his gaze, finding in it everything she needed to know about the path ahead. Not certainty, not promises of perfect happiness, but authentic connection and the courage to pursue possibility together. "Yes," she said, lacing her fingers through his. More than okay. The plane banked gently eastward, carrying them toward Boston, toward a future neither could fully envision, but both were increasingly eager to discover. As the familiar landscape receded below, Margaret felt not the severing of ties, but their gentle stretching to accommodate new horizons. The lonely widow who had helped a stranded motorist on a rainy night would never have imagined the journey that simple act of kindness would begin. But as Jack smiled at her across the space between them, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that her life's most unexpected chapter might also prove to be its most beautiful. Not an ending, but a transformation. Not replacement of what was lost, but expansion of what remained. Not merely second chances, but the discovery that love, in all its forms, knows neither time nor boundaries when hearts remain open to its possibility.